Hello everyone, you're tuned into the Reuters Events webinar, Shifting Your Content and Creative to Align with Cultural Phenomena. In times of disruptive change, content and creative directors are under a lot of pressure to share a consistent, clear, and reliable message with their customers. So how are the world's most recognizable brands connecting with their customers during this time? My name is Jasmine Keys, and today I am joined by a panel of expert leaders to understand exactly this. As usual, I'd firstly like to introduce a good friend of Reuters Events, Nicholas Zeisler. Nick is an all-round marketing and customer experience expert. Over the past few years, he has been bopping between independent consulting, the US Air Force, and HP, most recently as Director of Customer Experience. How are you, Nick?
Doing well, Jazz. Good afternoon to you out there.
And thank you for joining us. We're really excited to get started. Now, while I introduce our speakers, we'd like to pose a question to the audience. So let me just bring that up. Now, Nick, as you know, we're just going to be having a look at this poll. And we're looking at it's which trends align with your focus as we enter a post-COVID-19 world? Now, is it dynamic creative production helps businesses automate and align with marketing budget cuts? Is it DTC, one-to-one marketing becomes more powerful? Agile content creation is the new norm? Creative becomes a priority over data-driven insights? Or is it influencer marketing loses traction? Now I know they are quite a broad array of trends, so I'm really interested to hear what everyone has to say. Now, while you are answering that, I'll give a little intro to our speakers. Firstly, we have Evan Jones, Chief Marketing Officer at Fender, and then we have Carol Tran, Head of Growth at Dolby Labs. Firstly, Evan, would you like to take a quick moment to introduce yourself in a few words? And Carol, I'll let you jump in after him with a really quick intro. Really excited to have you guys. Evan, tell us a little bit about your role at Fender. Looks like we're just having a few issues with Evan's audio. So Carol, would you like to kick us off and tell us a little bit more about yourself and your role at Dolby Labs?
Absolutely. Thank you, Jasmine. Hello, everybody. My name is Carol Tran, and I'm the head of growth at Dolby Labs. And as a head of growth, I do a lot of growth hacking. The terminology is basically hacking ways of growing businesses during times of, where you need to pivot or you need to hack ways to grow quicker with limited resources. And during this specific certain time, growth hacking is needed more than ever for marketers.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. I know you are so passionate about growth hacking, and I'm really looking forward to hearing a little bit more about what you're doing at Dolby Labs to help this household name through an obviously unprecedented time. So I'm going to show the poll results and we'll get Evan to do a little intro shortly. So we have a look now. We can see that agile content creation is the new norm is definitely a winner with over half of the audience choosing that option as the biggest trend really to focus on as we enter a post-COVID-19 world. Nick, what are your thoughts on that? Was that kind of your choice, or were you heading towards a different option?
No, Jazz, actually, that really aligns with a lot of what I'm hearing, including over the previous webinars that you and I have been part of as well. I think it's really not so much about any sort of rigid solution, any sort of, this is what things are going to look like. I mean, there's a lot of discussion, what's gonna maintain and what's going to endure after all of this goes back to quasi-normal or whatnot. And I really think, and I'm hearing it from a lot of marketers and from a lot of customer experience experts that are also saying, I think that the thing that will endure is that nothing will, except that if you're dynamic and if you're agile, then you'll actually be able to adjust as things continue to change. So I think that's really going to be the the trend that we see is people who are able to adapt well are going to thrive in this new environment.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, this option is obviously focused on content creation because that's what this webinar is about, content and creative, but agile marketing, agile teams, I think that a big learning from this experience, that this crisis that we're all going through, is that we need to be more nimble. We need to be able to adapt faster. And Carol, I think you really are a wealth of knowledge in agile and adapting quickly and growing. What do you think about the results of this and the trends of the post-COVID-19 world?
Oh, absolutely. Everything that Nicholas has mentioned, I absolutely agree. I mean, my growth team at Dolby, we're very agile. We have to be very nimble. I come from a background of being an entrepreneur and a startup where we don't have a lot of resources, such as money, time, to beat that, the timeline that we have and so little resources, and we have to be able to achieve it at a certain threshold, whether we have investors or are just self-funded. And because of that aspect, we have to move quickly and pivot as quickly as possible in uncertain conditions. I always say the environment is very volatile, even prior to the COVID-19 times. So right now, I think all businesses are having a really quick lesson on being a growth hacker themselves. Yes, content is very important. And I always believe this, right, even before what we're going through, is that transparency is key. The way our society is pivoting, we're selecting brands and companies based on what they stand for. We don't just buy products, we buy from people. What do they stand behind their product, and why are they doing it? Are they adding value to, help the end consumer and making the world a better place? So being agile with content, which basically to me is being transparent, being straight from the heart, and understand that you need to be relatable because everyone is going through exactly the same thing as you are. And how are you solving that pain? And so when I look at businesses, you don't have to forfeit data-driven insights just to be more creative. You can do both, because data insights actually helps us understand more about how our environment is changing and how we can actually adapt to that.
I completely agree. And honestly, when I was putting that one in, I was interested in the feedback from both the audience or the attendees and from our panelists, because I think that perhaps we swing one way or another at times within an organization, but they are both key to successful marketing. And that does remind me, everyone in the audience, we are going to be taking questions. And if you have any comments throughout the webinar, we want this to be as interactive as possible. So please do ask those questions. We'll be taking them throughout the webinar, and then a whole bunch at the end. So I'd like to kind of briefly, before we jump in to the questions and give Evan an opportunity to introduce himself, I'd like to share an opportunity to register for the upcoming Virtual Brand Marketing Summit. As we build out the virtual portfolio within Reuters events, we are offering a few smaller events to introduce the opportunity to the Insight community for free. However, this does not mean that we are sacrificing quality at all. A few leaders from our all-star speaker lineup at this particular summit, which is on June 2nd, are the Global Marketing Director of Brand Partnerships at Boss. We've got the SVP of Marketing Communications at MasterCard, the Director of Brand Marketing and Strategy at Aston Martin, the Head of Brand Marketing at Vodafone, and our very own Carol Tran, who's on the webinar with us today, will also be featured as a speaker. So I will send around a link for you to register for free. So jump on that. This is an audio only webinar, so you can pop between websites and kind of do a bit of research as we're going through the webinar. Now that we've got Evan here, Evan, can you hear me okay?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfectly. Sorry, we had a bit of an audio issue there, but glad to have you. Very excited. could you tell us a little bit about yourself? Carol's done a little intro and we've had a little bit of a chat, but we'd love to hear about what you're doing at Fender.
Yeah, happy to. And it looks like I've just been able to get onto the main Zoom as well. So I'll stay on the phone. But yeah, my name's Evan Jones. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Fender. I've been here just a little bit past 5 years, but I head up all marketing for the brand, whether it's from our artist marketing, social media, PR, advertising, to retail, but also growth marketing and CRM.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Evan. And I think that this is a good opportunity to pass it over to Nick. I know that he has a lot of questions for you and Carol. So Nick, would you like to kick it off?
Yeah, you bet. Thanks, Jess. So, Evan and Carol, thanks so much for joining us. Also thanks to all the participants that we have here in the room. I would just emphasize once again, as Jazz did, to go ahead and put your questions in that chat box there in the Q&A, and we'll be getting to those as well as we go through. Let's kick it off. First question for Carol. You kind of alluded to this in the addressing that we did of the poll just now, but I also wonder what your thoughts are a little more specific. The topic today, of course, is that we're shifting. We're going in this, with this world, everything that's going on, from selling to relationship building between your brand and your customers. What does that shift look like? What does it mean at Dolby? And then, Evan, I'd like to hear your thoughts when it comes to Fender as well.
Oh, okay. That sounds great. Yes, at Dolby, everyone recognizes the Dolby name. It's a legacy brand, very well respected with their audio products. However, I was brought in just a little bit under a year ago to come in and actually do something that isn't really expected from what the public hears about. We just launched Dolby.io about almost a week and a half ago. And on there, we have APIs for businesses like startups to all the way to enterprise to have the accessibility of that Dolby magic, utilizing our product in a way that will help, elevate your business to the next level. It is affordable, accessible, and, prior to that, our Dolby products are normally assessed at a higher range. And when we did Dolby.io, I really thought it was very important to connect to the community of understanding if we're making this accessible, how are we building a relationship to those individuals? Are we speaking to them the way they are understanding Dolby? Obviously, with the record we have, it is really premium. But can those businesses understand that? Can they afford it? Are they educated in knowing what this offering is? So during the time when we're having this phenomena, we need to do a lot of education, a lot of transparency, speak to individuals of what their needs are. We may be building things and communicating things that we think they need to hear because that's what we're seeing. But sometimes it's important to actually have an open dialogue, whether it is a good one or a bad one. I think it's important to, understand how to be in touch with the community and be able to have them have an impact on our product and shape it. So that's where we're at Dolby, and I was able to lead the build out of the growth playbook. And that's another separate session there, how I discuss in making things automated, but yet at the same time, still having that human touch. Automation doesn't mean you remove that human element and not building that bond, but being able to reach as many as possible so that they are heard and not one message or communication is being left unseen. Yeah. So that's where we are at Dolby.
It's almost a little bit, Carol, it sounds like I hear you saying that maybe it's even a false choice to have to say it has to be either building relationships or selling because, the products that you have, those are valuable to people and especially during this time, but it still is about building the relationships as well, right?
Yeah, I just don't like using the word selling. However, we sell every single day, right? We sell our brand ourselves, but sometimes I think because in the past, the word selling is just so pushed, right? There are people who you hear the words saying it's too salesy. It's because there's a disconnect of, are you just selling to benefit from you making the revenue and the commission? Or are you really caring you're solving problems? So at the end of the day, you can bond the two, like selling and actually building relationships. They're both the same, but I think when people had that negative connotation, it's because they removed that relationship building.
Yeah, they sure go hand in hand. So, Evan, let's hear about what you've got going on over at Fender too. As I understand it, you had some programs actually in the works already that lent themselves kind of to making this, the shift towards relationship. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, for sure. Just a little context for those who may not know. I mean, we've been building musical instruments and equipment for artists and players since, about 1946 here in Southern California. And about 5 years ago, quite a few of us joined the executive team. And since that time, there have been a couple key shifts that have helped us both drive growth of our business, but also help build the brand. And, generally that's involved putting the bulk of our primary marketing dollars into amplifying artists, driving more excitement and purpose around new product introductions, and investing in growing our social channels and influencer network. But I think the biggest investments that we've made were, number one, we created a digital product and engineering team within Fender, which, for a company that's been building guitars and amplifiers was definitely a big shift at the company. But the intent was to have that team develop and deliver a suite of apps designed to complement the player's experience. We've launched several, which thus far have even included a tuning app that generates over 1 million monthly average users globally. Secondly, we added a growth marketing and CRM team as a core function within marketing to evolve both how we build the brand, but also how we acquire and retain players over time. But I think the biggest thing that we did that probably has kind of lent itself to this shift is in 2017 when we launched Fender Play. And Fender Play, for those who don't know, it's an online subscription service for iOS, Android, and web, really designed to help first-time and early-stage players get started, learn to play, and stick with it. Over the last 2.5 years, we've been steadily growing our subscriber base. We've significantly enhanced our ability to acquire and retain new players. But, I share all of that because when the coronavirus hit, we made a decision as a company to just simply give 3 months of Fender Play away for free. No strings attached, no credit card required. And our thought process here was really no more complicated than to hopefully provide a little bit of catharsis and creative outlet to people at a time when they would be spending, more of it at home, either on their own or with families. So towards the end of March this year, we announced it would be available to the first 100,000 who took us up on the offer. We thought it would take a month to hit that number, but literally 3 days later, we were there. The response just blew us away. So we decided to open it up to 500,000, and a few weeks after doing so, surpassed that. Since then, based on the overwhelming response, we've opened it up to 1 million people, and we're steadily watching it grow towards that as we speak. But I think most importantly, what's been exciting to us is to see how people are using it and what they're sharing. To the point of kind of merging the brand experience with their own personal experience. On the artist front, we've had over 200 artists from Jimmy Page to Ashley McBryde and her share it across their channels. And that's generated tens, if not hundreds of millions of impressions and eyeballs. We've generated over 6 billion media impressions from this in the first month alone. But I think the most powerful aspect of it for us is that we've also seen incredible human stories on our channels of people using Fender Play as a reason to pick up guitar again or grab a new one, and more importantly, to kind of cope and navigate their way through a difficult time. So what we're excited about is we've seen it make a difference in people's lives, and honestly, that was everything we were hoping for.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I mean, I love the thought of having had something in place already. You had Fender Play, it existed as it was, but also being kind of in a corporate mindset where you could easily say, hey, this makes sense, right, at a time like this, to leverage this thing that we currently have in such a way that'll help build those relationships, right?
Yeah, totally. And I mean, just to take it down to the simplest conversation, as a management team, we even had a lot of discussions around, well, should we ask for a credit card or not? And there were some folks who, had been building this as a subscription service for quite some time who felt like, oh, we got to make sure we ask for the credit card because we're running a business. But I think as a team, we took a step back, and even the simple gesture for those who are in the subscription business, like, what a jump that is. We basically are saying, we're not trying to do anything more than provide this to you. And so what we've tried to do is marry the sort of commercial gesture, which is giving it away for free, with kind of our brand values, which are all about putting more music out in the world, supporting our artists, and ultimately just finding ways to amplify expression.
Yep, absolutely. That's great. It actually kind of leads to a question that had been posed from an attendee, somebody who wanted to attend live but couldn't, but had sent this question to Jazz, and so I'll pass it on because this kind of plays along with that. And I'd like to get Evan and Carol, both of you, to weigh in here. It's, we're moving to this being human type of a thing, and that's how this person wrote the question, asking about empathy and the needs that we have, and trying to keep those minimal when it comes to, like, physical things, right? And it's more about how we're connecting with each other. How are you seeing that? Carol, we'll start with you on this. How are you seeing that, and how does that kind of play out in the marketing work and the growth that you're trying to build?
Could you rephrase that question? You said physical. Yeah,
it's kind of as though in post COVID-19, we're living in ways that just simply the standard of living is challenging. And just as humans, we're having to kind of go back to realizing what's important to us, right? And a lot of that has to do with empathy and connection and so forth, and not so much with physical and material things.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the way I see it is that, look, I know it's difficult for all of us, with this sudden change. And I know that there's ways of giving back and being able to have that empathy, knowing that even though you're in a situation with your business right now, there's ways of still giving back to the community. Because at the end of the day, where you are is a lot better off than some other businesses, right? So there is still stuff that you can be able to help out that wouldn't impact your revenue if you're looking at that, and not saying that you have to give everything for free, but you can still monetize as well. The way we looked at Adobe is that there are things that we can give right now. We're giving away free minutes to individuals who need our API, to use our audio, our video, and conferencing, and being able to help our current state of the world, right? If you're in healthcare, anything that you're dealing with that your business unit is helping the state of the world right now, we're offering that for free. However, if you're not, it doesn't mean that we're not allowing you to have these free minutes. We have other ways of offering that as well. But there's other businesses that will give discounts or will actually play around with our monetization package. That's where we have to be nimble and agile. You can't just say, this is the cost and this is how we are, and if we're not going to be able to hit our revenue, then we can't do this and we can't give things for free. There has to be a balance, but we also have to be human. You're always better off than someone else. There's always something you can give. And so that's why I think if people are paying attention more than ever right now, how you do things, how you treat your employees, how you treat consultants, everything is very closely looked at, because people are all in pain, but we can all help together to rise together. We hear that common line a lot, but make it unique to your own business, make it come from the heart of your people in your business. And what can you do to give back? But also at the same time, can you partner up with other businesses where you guys could leverage each other, combine efforts, and build a package that can help the community so that we can rise above what's going on right here, but still also making monetization, packages that will bring in revenue.
Yeah, you bet, Carol. And of course, I suppose it helps if you already have those relationships built, not just with your partners and other folks in the industry, but also with your customers in the first place, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Evan, what are your thoughts on that? You kind of touched on it. We were talking about the Fender Play and the move that you made there, but would you like to expand?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the question's a great one, because I think as marketers, on the one hand, you're always looking to understand what's the data, what's the growth metric, what are my core KPIs, is what I'm putting out in the world leading to some version of growth, whether that's direct business growth or brand growth. I think for us, we look across multiple touch points. So one is, of course, data and KPIs tied to our funnels, but I think for us, it's bigger than that. We have direct relationships with key constituencies. And in our case, in addition to players, that also includes thousands of artists around the world and influencers who are willing to have honest conversations. And they both inspire us in terms of what we do, but they're also great conduits for inspiration and insight. And, many of them are dealing with the whole shift in what's happened as well. So, we look at that as a really important source of information for us. I think for any brand who's active on social media, if you're willing to have the open dialogue, if you're willing to have an authentic relationship with your fan base, which we think is critical, then, in return, you can get a really great read on whether or not what you're doing is having an impact, despite what the data says. So I think it's this constant balancing act of trying to figure out, how to make people's lives easier and better, how to measure that back against the business that, as marketers, we're all sort of accountable to help support. But I think that's how we approach it. And so even with this, Fender Play giveaway, which we've called Playthrough, to see the embrace of that offer around the world, but then to also hear from media, from artists, and from retailers even, that they're seeing it as a great move, and they're actually getting great feedback from their own fans, we think is really important for us to hear.
Yeah, that's great. And you kind of in answering that touched on another question that Gigi Matthews has asked in the chat box here, and so I'm going to pose it to you, and I'll see how comfortable, how far back you want to pull the curtain on Fender, and then Carol, I'll ask you the same thing for Dolby. But the question is, how are you balancing profitability and sales? And then the explicit ask here is that you're building relationships, in this current situation. Everybody kind of wants discounted stuff, but how are you balancing that? And then the plus on the end of this question from Gigi is, are you delaying purchases that are not essential?
It's a great question. I think, if I go back to the offer that we put out there, our decision at that point was that we weren't going to make any money off it. And in fact, kind of the primary two KPIs that we focused on as a team were hopefully helping alleviate the stress that people were going to feel with this transition, and sort of one of the only ways we know how as a music company. But then secondly, longer term, quite frankly, if this leads to us helping generate more artists in the world 10 years from now, some of whom may have fell in love with the guitar during this time frame, that was going to be enough for us. Because I think what we've seen as we've marketed Fender Play and we've put it out there is that there's not necessarily a one-to-one relationship between the size of your software, or in our case, app subscriber base, and the physical side. And in fact, what we've seen inadvertently, it was never our intention, but the Playthrough offer we're hearing from our independent retail network has actually significantly spiked sales for them. And they're getting a lot more interest coming in from, frankly, people who are new to the category. So, you sort of look at it as market expansion versus, working with the audience, and again, to go back to it, we never started with a financial metric as the target. We started with a brand metric as a target. And I think that's tension that most executive teams always go through. But when the executive team is aligned, when the sales and product and supply chain and marketing teams can be aligned, I think that's where companies have their best opportunities. And in our case, we chose something that was very much in line with who we are as a brand.
Yeah, it's great. It's kind of everybody wins there then, and it doesn't have to be a choice then, is what you're saying. If it's done right, I suppose.
If it's done right, and if you're authentic about it, and if you're willing to stand behind it, yes. But, these are all leaps of faith, because there is no roadmap right now. And this is obviously a very unique time, hopefully only ever a once in a lifetime moment. But it's an important conversation for teams to be having across functions.
Yeah. By the way, before I get to Carol for this question too, Evan, someone's asking how big your subscriber file is. So I don't know if you want to share that number or not, but.
Well, we're not a publicly traded company, so we don't share all of that globally. But what I can tell you is that with the Playthrough giveaway, we've essentially been introduced to 1 million new players, 90% of whom we had never connected with before, either through our CRM database or anything else. So in terms of scale, that's a number that we're willing to share publicly, because that's the number that we've also opened up to those who redeem.
Yep. All right. Carol, the question from Gigi was about balancing this desire to build out these relationships, but also to make money too, right? Because we are businesses.
Right. I absolutely agree with Evan, what he's saying. And it works, for Fender. But here's a contrasting view. And doesn't mean I disagree with what Evan says. I actually in agreement. But because of my entrepreneurial background and being a startup, there are businesses that can't afford being able to have, like delaying certain purchases that are, essential, and they have to really look at numbers. Yes, brand is important, but I think what you need to literally leverage is your transparency. Speak from the heart, saying what's your current situation, why are you building this, right? And even though I'm speaking from startups, there are attendees right now that are from larger companies. And the reason why I transfer my philosophy of startup world into a larger corporation is because we have to be nimble. There are a lot of approval process. Yes, having cross-functional teams is ideal, but sometimes it doesn't happen, right? And especially during a stressful time that is impacting everyone in the world, and we're trying to scramble to innovate or figure out how can we shift now to work together in this new world where people are saying that they're burnt out from working from home. And then people are saying, I never wanted to work from home because they never did it. But this is different. It's not working from home. It's working from home in a very stressful situation. It's pandemic. So when we look at that, I really want to emphasize build. That is the number one thing you need to do. Build what you intended to do prior to pre-COVID, okay? And know that you're building to address a pain. This is why we're in the business we are. There were customers that are pre-COVID that wanted to buy you, right? You don't have to say, well, we have to delay this. What you need to do is, how can you adapt to the new change? You can innovate during this time. Let me remind everyone here. Remember, Airbnb, Uber, they all changed and built and pivoted during the time when everyone says it's during the recession, and they came out of it. Yes, this is bigger than that, but what I'm trying to say is, like, yes, there's ways of still making profit. And by doing so is looking at your current products, what is the need right now? Being able to have your pulse on the environment to, and for example, you have to test, you have to see what's going on, but still build and execute. People have paralysis right now, right? Wondering like, okay, this is not working. Our team is doing this. We got to get on the ball. This is not responding. Maybe we should give discounts. Instead of thinking about that, you also do it in parallel, execute, build, continue to test what the environment is saying. Today, the customers love you. Tomorrow, they'll go to your competitor. So you have to be always focused and nimble and agile for that. So you don't want to delay certain purchases. How do you know which one's not essential? What you consider is not essential might be essential to a niche that you didn't even know existed. You might even entirely pivot your business into something completely different. But you need to be able to know that you don't have to give it for free. Just as much as another business not willing to give you free stuff, right? Because you depend on certain things as well to run your business. So that's how I look at it during this COVID situation. But your branding comes from transparency, being able to speak from the heart why you're building this, and also knowing that people will understand. But you can still make money from this during this time. And if you can't right now, build, continue to build and execute, and you will see that at one point we'll rise beyond this pandemic.
Yeah, Carol, I love that answer. And it really does put the finger right on what it is that brings together two really important things, at least from the perspective of these webinars that we're having these days. And that is the connection between marketing and customer experience. And the one thing that's evergreen between both of those, I think, is that people always have problems. People always have needs. And if you're concentrating what you do as a company, as an organization, on solving those problems, it could take a lot of different forms. And that's the sort of thing that'll always be the case, whether there's a pandemic and all of this going on, or whether times are normal. Evan, were you going to say something?
I apologize. Nope.
Or the kid ran in the room then.
Literally.
Yeah. Actually, I got a question here from Avram. And I think, Evan, it goes to the answer that you had in this past question. And you had mentioned your brand metric. And this question is asking just more specifics on that. What is the brand metric? And then the suggested possibilities is the people relief of stress, or how are you measuring what Fender Play, that it's been a success? Obviously, you've got a great adoption, but what was it that you were trying to measure?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think when we talk about our brand, there's a lot of different ways that we measure it. And for example, one of those is on stage share. We estimate that if you look at the top 25 concerts around the world, and of course this is pre-coronavirus kicking in, we're used by 85 to 90% of all the artists who play any fretted instrument around the world. So that's an important metric for us. We can't tie that back directly to sales, but that's a key metric. I think as we look at this moment in time and how we're measuring the impact of the brand, outside of the media impressions, the adoption and take up of the offer, and frankly, in sort of massive influx into our channels, whether it's our owned and operated channels, our social media channels, our followers, our engagement, some of the anecdotal information we're getting through our independent retail channels is really important to us. And what the better independent retailers are seeing is that this offer in its own way is contributing to a bump in sales that they're seeing at their level. And I think the better ones are getting a much better sense of how many of those sales are coming from new and first-time players. And they're getting a much better sense of what that geographic distribution looks like, especially in the United States. I think at a global level, what's been really interesting to us as well and very exciting is that if you look at the distribution of people around the world who've taken us up on this offer, about 60% of the total redemptions of this offer have been in the United States, about 70% between the US and Canada. But a big number of the redemptions have come from Europe. And everybody from the UK down to Italy. I think all of us kind of remember when the coronavirus hit, Italians serenading each other on the balconies in Italy. But we've been able to track and see what that redemption looks like. And indirectly, we've been able to tie that back to the performance of our businesses in each of those markets during these last 2 months. So we don't necessarily hold ourselves accountable to a hardcore sales metric with this move. We have other things that we do for the business that are more in that zone. But I think tied to this offer and tied to this moment, that's how we're looking at it.
Yeah, and surely that'll end up tying out to sales down the road as well, right? I mean, it always, it's not that it always has to come back to those top line numbers, but surely they're in the mix, as you'd mentioned. They
are, and I think for anybody who's ever tried to play guitar, that it's a journey, not a sprint.
Yes, it is.
For some people, they need time, and so we're not necessarily with this initiative holding ourselves accountable to any result this year. It's really about the next 5 years of players. And I think that we kind of look at that as another metric over time, that because we now have a CRM team and growth marketing team as part of the marketing mix, we're also tracking more holistically as a company.
Yeah. All right. Let's shift gears a little bit here and bring Carol back. I want to ask you about some of the advocacy that you embrace. You advocate in professional as well as personal circumstances to leverage discomfort, not necessarily to love discomfort, but to at least leverage it rather than just trying to resist change. And we're certainly in a world now where things are happening that are out of our control. What do you recommend to brands these days when it comes to taking that, that resilient perspective, given where we are? And then Evan, come back around and ask your thoughts on that as well.
I think I embraced, being uncomfortable is because of my startup world. I know I keep on bringing it back to there, but it applies to all businesses. I'm bringing it to Dolby. I brought it to larger businesses. But it really stems from that, in the fact that you're going to be uncomfortable where you've heard the startup world where people are, don't have enough food to eat because they have to put all their money into the business, right? And I'm not saying that that's the best way of approaching things and seeing what discomfort is. A good example right now that we all can relate, right? Not every business actually embraced remote work, working from home, right? And so all of a sudden, everyone having that lesson right now, right? And those businesses that have distributed remote, distributed employees or consultants all over the world is adapting really quickly. Now, how we respond to this remote new world here is how those businesses going to thrive, right? If you resist change and there's going to be a force of like having everybody go back to the office, then you're not really adapting change. I'm only giving an analogy here. This is not where I'm saying remote versus going back to the office. But right now, we're all having lessons of different ways, not just remote work, but also looking at how do we respond to the new world. And discomfort actually forces everyone to execute. I think we sometimes as humans, I mean, if you think about it, humans are creatures of habit, right? Even in businesses, we have a system, we're making, revenue, everything's good, and then all of a sudden the world's turned upside down. Discomfort is what makes us all grow, force us to execute, force us to innovate, force us to adapt to that change. You have no other choice. Either you float or you sink, but you don't want just to float, you want to thrive. And by doing so, you want to see, here's a problem, how can you solve it? There's not one solution, there are millions of solutions. It's just how you approach it. And when you do the solution, finding that solution to that problem, you might end up creating more money than you can imagine. So I do believe in being uncomfortable. And I wish that most people do feel that this is a perfect time to even, rebuild our world to a better place, and how we look at businesses in a different way, and how we treat each other at work, and how we collaborate with each other rather than having approval process that takes forever, and actually putting trust to those who are experts, who you've hired or who has been hired in that role to do their job. And with that, I think it's giving us a different new lens. So being uncomfortable is really important for businesses right now, everywhere.
Yeah, Carol, I love the example there about the working from home. And if as they say that necessity is the mother of invention, it's also interesting to see how in this world right now, something that was just impossible, we can't let everybody go work from home, suddenly becomes the only answer that you can implement because of kind of that necessity. So I think that's an important perspective, and I appreciate that. Evan, what are your thoughts on kind of embracing or at least, leveraging the discomfort?
Well, I think if you're okay, maybe I'll kind of tie that with what looks like two other questions from the group. One around kind of being agile and creating content, the other around budgets.
Yeah, you bet. Go for it.
Yeah, I think from my standpoint, if I look at marketing's role right now, I think the main point is that, brands need to focus on how they can be most impactful. And whether it's, software as a business solution or a consumer solution or a brand, I think the point is they need to get scrappy, they need to do more with less. And there's a level of discomfort that comes with that, especially when you're a brand who's used to always delivering an aspirational message. But I think now more than ever is the time to be creative. So when it comes to content and being agile in content, I think one thing that is going for everybody who's making content right now is that lo-fi production is the name of the game right now. And, for anyone out there who's been used to big production budgets and throwing a lot of advertising dollars and taking big swings at one or two initiatives a year, no time like the present to just try different things. And in our case, we turn a lot of the creative control over to artists themselves who are making content from their homes. And I think what's been surprising to us is if we're willing to be agile in how we drive briefs and creative approvals, and if we're willing to let the community tell us when something is successful, we've actually seen tremendous response across our channels, both in terms of people opting to follow our channels or to engage. We've seen viewership and time spent on our different channels and site go through the roof. but a lot of it is driven by people, us on the marketing team, being willing to take a more agile approach. At the same time, I think it's also important to start being planful again, but every brand is different, every company is different. I would say that, in terms of budgets, I think a mistake that companies could make would be to withdraw completely. Because, one of the things for sure is coming out the other side of this, brands that have already built an authentic, meaningful position may come out in better shape than those who haven't. And a lot of it comes down to trust. If people are having to make hard decisions around where to put their dollars or what brands to build and, have relationships with, they're going to want to go with brands they trust. And I think being authentic, being real, being lo-fi, demonstrating you can be agile, but also demonstrating that you're still committed to putting messaging out there and putting inspiration out there or putting information out there. I think those are things that consumers see and feel. We've committed to doing that, albeit, no surprise, at a slightly lower level than we would have been doing, based on managing our budgets. But in a lot of ways, the response has been overwhelmingly positive. And, I think I would encourage everybody who's in those conversations to think about how to put those pieces together.
Yeah, it sounds like you're really kind of singing the same tune, if you will, that Carol is about, speaking from your heart with authenticity and so forth. Carol, to bring you back in here, that's good advice all the time, but these days, how's it paying off? And maybe not necessarily financially, but I mean, generally speaking, how's it paying off, that speaking from your heart and the authenticity?
I think it doesn't matter whether we're going through COVID, like during the current situation that we're going through. It should always be the forefront. And when you're speaking from the heart, you are relating to the other person. And because they can understand where you're coming from, why you're building this, why you're passionate about it. And, whether you agree or not, I'm giving you a good example so that there's a point of reference, like Airbnb, from the CEO, unfortunately, during, what he wrote, did speak from the heart. He did his best in trying to retain all his employees. But what he wrote, it really spoke from the heart. He was very transparent. No business owner would like to, go through that situation, but he had to be transparent to show why he built it in the first place and how much he cared about every single individual that worked for his company. And that's just an example there. And I think whether it pays off, I think if you're looking at like, how does that, help you with your business, it may not come right away, right? And if it doesn't come right away, start evaluating, was it sincere? Was it coming from your heart? Is it transparent enough? You don't want to lay everything out there, but transparency is basically stating what you're going through and how you are not serving your customers where you want to be prior to the situation, right? And you want their input too, because they are part of the build of your product, right? Talk to them. This is the time to not go silent. This is the time to actually even go one step further. Talk to the individuals that you're building these products for, services, no matter what it is, large, small, you have an ability to talk to these individuals beyond just, putting out emails and just campaigns. Maybe having select individuals where you reach out and send a personal message. You will learn a lot. And from there, you'll be surprised that some of these customers will give you some value added input that you can actually create more revenue than you could ever imagine.
Yeah. Carol, you also mentioned, about Airbnb and so forth. And with so many people across the world having lost their jobs and so many people very nervous about potentially losing their jobs, it's interesting now how brands and how companies are addressing when they do have to lay people off now. And your customers and potential customers are actually paying attention to that sort of thing more than they usually ever would, right? Because it's such a shared experience, or at least a shared anxiety about it potentially happening to somebody, right? And so I think your point about authenticity and speaking from your heart, when it comes to that, the whole world is watching in ways that potentially those internal decisions within your company that your customers might not otherwise, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Evan, let's go back to you. Real quick question before we hand it back over to Jazz here in a few minutes. You've said that the definition of the stage is changing. Everybody's trapped inside. You had mentioned Italy in an earlier part of the discussion today, away from each other, and they're all playing out on their balconies and so forth. How is Fender adjusting to that change in the definition of the stage?
Yeah, it's been really interesting to see what's been happening. And we sort of look at it through a couple different angles. I think first, as it relates to general consumers and players, I think when I first got to Fender about 5 years ago, we conducted our first ever consumer research to really understand the data of how people were using it, what their aspirations were on a global basis, especially in the US as well. And what was really interesting to see is that as guitar has shifted and expanded and become embraced across more genres, so have the aspirations of the people who play. So, years ago, it was probably entirely the province of those who just wanted to play on stage. And everybody has that image in their head of, rock star on stage, hair blowing, leg up on amp, shredding. But it's changed a ton since then. And in really encouraging ways. 50% of all new guitars in the last 5 years have been purchased by women. And their majority of them are comfortable shopping online. But what's been really interesting for us to see is that the primary drivers for people to play guitar are not entirely anymore about being on stage, and actually more about learning a new skill and embracing that individually at home, never intending to share that with others. There's a group that we call self-improvers that make up about 30% of all players in the world who are very comfortable using apps and just want to use it as a release. There's another group that we call creators who are essentially those who create music at home. It could be everything from simply on their phone to GarageBand to more complicated versions of production. But what's really exciting for us to see is that we have found new ways to connect with them. And so having a bigger digital ecosystem with more touch points and more ways to provide inspiration and connect with them actually allows us to serve all consumers while also, hoping to get back on stage soon once the world kind of allows us. And that kind of takes me to artists, which is, I think, the other group. And for us, so much of what we do is about supporting the artists. In fact, Leo told his second wife, years before he passed, that he believed he was put on the earth to serve artists and that his job was to give them wings. And we've taken that to heart as a company, and that is very much aligned with our company vision. And so when it comes to artists, they've all had to adapt to this current reality. And what we've done is we've opened up our channels to them and found new ways to give them exposure. They've opted in to create new content and share it with our fan base. What's been important to them is that they also find ways to support the people who support them. So one of the initiatives that we've launched is every time an artist contributes a piece of content to our social channels, we make a donation to the Music Cares Coronavirus Fund in their name. And they take a lot of pride in that. We think it's important to support them in that. We've also launched programs like Fender Next, which is oriented around helping identify and discover the 25 new faces in guitar. And it was off to a great start this year until, March. Since then, we've shifted. We've partnered with other brands to create new platforms and stages online for them to get exposure. And I think the big thing we're all asking ourselves is, as live performance evolves and changes, what does the artist experience look like? But what we are dedicated to is actually working closely with them to support it. So I think as the stage changes, what is critical to us is that we remain as true to the artist and the player as we did before the situation, and that we'll even be more committed to that on the other side of it. Because in some really unexpected way, I think what you're seeing is that the connective power in music is taking on many new forms, and in some ways it's probably expanding.
Yeah, that's awesome, Evan. That's a great inspiration, in fact, and emphasizes how important it is to be true to your North Star, right, as an organization. I think as long as you follow what that mission and what that vision is that you've laid out for yourself, you can weather storms like this because you're actually built for it. Before we hand it back, because we're coming up on the top of the hour here, I just want to kind of pass to Carol and Evan, give each of you just a minute or so to kind of wrap up with some final thoughts, inspirational quotes, or whatever you'd like to do to share as we move toward the end of the conference here. So Carol, what have you to say?
Well,
leave it open for you.
well, I just like I've been saying, like, you know, being agile and nimble, always thinking that, you know, you have limited resources, even if you have a lot more resources at a larger company, you always have that mindset of like, what would you do with only these few dollars? You know, obviously you have to be creative, right? And when you have that shift in that mindset, you're able to come up with a million ways of dealing with that limited amount of resource. And resource to you could be the number of people, right? You, or it could be your dollar, or, well, you have restraints on certain things that that is specific to your business. So with that, I just think that people need to just continue building and not, focus so much like maybe we should go silent. We don't want to go talk about that right now, or, maybe we have to give things for free. If you're not in a point where you can't give everything for free, be creative on how you're going to approach that business of yours, where you still make money, but maybe also giving back. Great. So it's about shifting your mindset. That's pretty much my departing words.
I like it, Carol. Thanks a lot. Evan, any closing thoughts before we pass back to Jazz?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality is that none of us know how long this current situation is going to last. And I think to the point of today, I think, being as agile as we can, having the hard conversations around how to build a brand, those are things that for us are a week-to-week endeavor. But I think, while you need to be very focused on solving for what's right in front of you, we also need to think about what's ahead. And maybe just as a plug for something that we are also starting, we launched something called the Fender Play Foundation towards the end of last year. And really what we intended that to be was a program that was going to help sort of inspire, educate, and equip the next generation of players, both in school and out of school. And setting it up as a 501c3 is intended to be, really our charitable extension of the brand. We've been fortunate enough to be recently approached by the LA Unified School District. And actually, in just a couple of weeks, we're going to launch a pilot with 1,500 students where they will all be sent electric, acoustic guitars, ukes, and basses directly to their homes. And then what we're also doing is working closely with the teachers of the LA Unified District to develop a curriculum that's both synchronous and asynchronous, so in person as well as online. And we're making Fender Play available to all of those students as well. And it's a small thing in the big picture, but I think as a backyard strategy for us, LA is our home, Southern California is our home. And I think, to the extent you can still find those ways to also invest in the next generation, truly no strings attached, you have to believe the results will pay for themselves over time. But that's just also a big part of what we're trying to do in this very challenging moment. And, we're fortunate to be invited to participate. And hopefully it will, again, lead to some, middle school child, hopefully picking up guitar. And if that happens, honestly, there's no better KPI for us than that. That's awesome, Evan. Great. Very inspirational too. Carol and Evan, thank you both. This has been a great conversation. Jazz, are you still out there?
I am.
All right. Well, hand it back to you now.
And Evan and Carol, honestly, fantastic to have you involved. You both really are a wealth of experience and knowledge. We really appreciate you joining us. And in the same vein as you were discussing, Evan, we at Reuters Events are trying to share as much knowledge and help all of the businesses out there, because this is a very challenging time. So as I mentioned at the start of the webinar, if you missed it, we do have the Reuters Events Virtual Brand Marketing Summit, which is next week on June 2nd. Now, this is all for free, a full day of presentations from some of the world's most recognizable brands. So if you'd like to join, you don't have to join live, but you can register via the link. We'll share it through now. And with that, you'll get all of the sessions on demand. You can share them with your team, and hopefully they can be really helpful for you to understand how to get through this really challenging time. And it is a really broad suite of presentations covering everything from content to brand story to influencers and social success. So hopefully you can join us there. I know that some of our speakers definitely will. And that's about it. Thank you so much, Nick. My name is Jasmine Keys, and I will be sending out the webinar recordings for this one tomorrow. If you have any questions about the Virtual Brand Marketing Summit or about any speakers or would like to get involved, please do reply to that email or ping me a message on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to have a chat. So thank you, everyone, and we'll log off there.
Thank you.